Hi, good evening. I'm Dr. Philip McMillan, and today I'm going to I'm not breaking, this story is already out there, but I'm sharing with you the implications of this very serious situation that has been highlighted by a congressman in the US. And it's about COVID natural immunity and what the evidence had. What I'll be looking at is I'll be sharing the statement from the congressman in the US with his interaction with the CDC. I'll be explaining about why the principle of natural immunity is so important in the context of severe disease and why it has such serious implications going forward. And it probably explains why he's fighting to get this information in the public arena. So, for those who would look at this as inconvenient information, this is all factual. I'll be sharing everything that is there. You can make your own judgments about it. Before I start, as usual, I'd like to encourage you to join us. This is Vejon Med Chatbot. We're almost ready for all 350 videos and more to be available. And all you have to do is click on the link. You come here, you put in your email address because we want to send you a newsletter. So you just put it in there, and it will then take you to the area where you can do all your searches. This is where you can do your searches. At the moment, we're developing the chatbot to answer questions, but if you type in the favorite is Geert, this is what everybody asks about, straight away all the videos come up that have been linked with Geert, and you can look at the breakdown of them as well. So very valuable. We're really excited about it, and we hope that you will find it valuable as well. And also, in the context of what I'll be sharing, I think it's important for everybody to be educated about COVID 19. This is over 40 modules, about 44, maybe a bit more by the end. Everything that I've been looking at from a research point of view, a few of them are free. So join us in this journey if you want to learn more about COVID 19. So let's get back to this question about COVID natural immunity. What really happened with regards to the CDC? Now, I love it when I come across a politician who is pretty straightforward, and this guy seems to be as straight as they get. He is Thomas Massie, and this is his picture here. He's a US representative since November 2012, and he was also a Lewis County judge executive in the Kentucky region close to Ohio. He did something that I thought was just absolutely brilliant, really important piece of work. And I'm going to share you his video that he put up on Twitter, just so that you can understand what it was about. In order to do this, just give me 1 second. But I will tell you that what he was doing was effectively making sure that people are held to account with regards to what it is that they are saying and doing. Implications of what he said here are really important. So let's see if we can bring this up here. There we go. I'll get him on full screen.
Mr. Chairman, I yield my time to the gentleman from Kentucky.
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
I thank the gentlelady from Florida. Assistant Secretary Egorin, there's some documents that we've been trying to get a hold of for years, and you all are withholding them, and I'm going to give you the story behind that and demand that you deliver them. So in December of 2020, the CDC produced an MMWR. That's one of their newsletters, kind of their version of an academic paper, characterizing the Pfizer trials of the vaccine, of the BioNTech vaccine. And the FDA had summarized the Pfizer trials. When the CDC's MMWR, they said that the vaccine was 92% efficacious for those who had already had COVID. I was struck by this claim because, well, first of all, I was interested because I had already had COVID and I was wondering whether to take the vaccine or not. And I had studied the Pfizer data, the top line data and the FDA characterization of it. And you know what? The problem with the CDC's claim is completely inaccurate. The trials didn't prove that at all. The trials weren't designed to prove that. So I called up the CDC and I recorded the phone call. And they said, we'll get the top scientist on the line with you and we'll find out what the deal is here. And they got their top scientist on the line. And she said, wow, you found a mistake in our paper. I can't believe this was in there. We will fix this. We're going to call you Eagle Eye Massie over here at the CDC. And said, okay, that's great. I appreciate you fixing this because there's no data to support this. So a month goes by, and in January of 2021, I call up and I look at their website. Lo and behold, nothing has been fixed. And I then started contacting people at the CDC, and they were very averse to fixing it, the misstatement. And this began a saga. Just 3 minutes or 3 hours into the Biden administration was one of these phone calls when the cover-up started to begin. They were conflicted. They wanted everybody to take the vaccine. They didn't have data that showed it would help anybody who had already had the COVID infection, but they didn't want to change this. So I made lots of calls, recorded them all. They admitted to me that they were wrong and said they would fix it. They eventually changed it, but they never did fix it. Okay. So then a FOIA request went to CDC, and they produced over 1,000 pages, most of it redacted like this. The FOIA request was every conversation about Congressman Massie, and it produced at CDC. It produced over 1,000 pages. Imagine that. But they were mostly redacted. They didn't want to say what they were saying about the truth that I was giving to them.
I'll just pause it there and I'll summarize essentially what he said. And credit where credit is due. He saw the document from the CDC, which looked at the Pfizer data, with the BioNTech data from the first study. And in it, they made reference to the fact that there was 92% risk reduction, but they linked it not just to people who had not had COVID, but to people who had COVID as well. And he was absolutely right. That was not tested in the study. So he then highlights this to them because he says, hold on, you've made a mistake. You've said that the people who've had COVID, actually that the vaccine protects against for those people who had COVID already. They recognized the error and they said, okay, yeah, we'll fix that. But then it seems politics got involved. And as he said, 3 hours after the inauguration in January, he was asking this question again, why are you not redacting that information? And he realizes the conflict, the problem is that it's purely, I think, political and logistic. They probably were aware that they were going to bring in vaccine mandates, even though it was in January. Maybe they had discussed this before. I don't know. But the problem is that if you're going to bring in a mandate, how do you tell who's had infection from who hasn't? Is it just that they tell you? Is it that they have proof of an infection? Is it that you have to check their antibodies? It would suddenly get very, very messy. And so, in fact, they kept that information out of the public eye. And they mandated to everybody, they advised everybody, whether or not you're in healthcare, if you have been exposed, this is where the concept of hybrid immunity came from. Don't worry, get an extra boost and you'll be fine. That's all well and good. But if you're going to do that, you need to be absolutely certain there are no risks to the people who receive it. Because in medicine, everything is a risk-benefit analysis. I mean, I can prescribe statins for anybody, but we usually assess the risk and benefit. There are benefits with statins. Some people would argue otherwise, but it doesn't even have to be statins. It could be any drug. We could prophylactically put everybody on an antihypertensive so that they don't get high blood pressure. That's not medicine. That's not science. Everything is a risk-benefit analysis. And if someone had COVID, the question you would have to or should have to prove is, do they still need a vaccine on top of it? Again, just reflect on any other disease. If you had measles a few months ago, would you then go and get a measles vaccine or chickenpox? That was not how it worked before. So why did it change with COVID? So let me explain to you about the science. And as long as you understand this, you'll realize why this is so important. This is one of the slides from the course that I'm talking about. It's an important study that was done in 2016 about dysregulated interferon and inflammatory monocyte macrophage responses in SARS-CoV infected mice. So this was done on mice to replicate what happened in SARS. That's the original pandemic in 2003, but the same rules apply for SARS-CoV-2. And what they clearly demonstrated is that if somebody had an early interferon response, even if they got infected, even if the viral titers went up, they would have mild disease. If they had no interferon response, even though the viral titers went up, they would have mild disease. If they had a delayed interferon response, and interferon is that signaling protein that warns the cells that virus is there, if that was delayed and it was strong, that's the template for getting severe disease. Now, what you have to realize is that in the context of mucosal immunity, and this is my diagram here, so you can see this is supposed to be a virus, gets into the upper airways, infects the cells, and it continues replicating and spreads. If you have natural immunity, which is broad and could even be formed from even any coronavirus, and in some cases been described even a rhinovirus, as long as the immune system recognizes the virus, it will give a signal, and that's interferon. And so, even though the virus may continue to go down into the lung and cause some inflammation, you will not get the severe inflammatory response that's associated with severe disease. I usually explain it in this way. What happens is this: it doesn't even matter which virus you use, but if you take a virus and you spray it into the lungs, it could be an influenza virus, it could even be a rhinovirus, but if you spray it or nebulize it into the lungs, you will get that same response, because the lungs are like the bunkers in the White House. uh, you shouldn't have a burglar in there. How did the burglar get down the lift into the bunker of the White House? It would trigger a military response. It's an overaction because it's not supposed to happen. And that's the template for severe disease. So, because the virus hides, it gets into the lungs, there is no interferon response, there's an overreaction in the lungs, and this is the template for severe disease. What it means, therefore, is that as long as somebody has mucosal immunity, natural mucosal immunity, their risk, it's not that it is not possible, but their risk is exceptionally low. And if you want to look at real world evidence for this, look at what's happening in places where there is natural herd immunity. If you look at the Africa region, they don't have any problems at the moment. And it's because they have natural mucosal immunity, which covers not just the spike on the virus, but all these other dots. These are the envelope proteins, M protein, inside is a nuclear capsid protein. So a very broad based immune response. So the principle should have been, and this is what I've said before, you should have done targeted vaccination. People who were high risk, we knew who they were. They were over a certain age. They had specific comorbidities, diabetes, high blood pressure. They are obese, and you target them if they have not been previously infected. And you would have found that your cohort would have been nice and tight, a small number of the population, and then on top of that, if people had severe disease, you should have used early intervention. the pandemic would have been over. But this became politics and not science. And clearly, the CDC was involved in this process. They should have been concentrating on the science, not on the politics, because it clearly meant a lot to that incumbent, because coming into the White House, they needed to do something big. And their view was that I think they were going to target the COVID pandemic. They were going to wipe it out with regards to vaccines. So they needed to get everybody vaccinated, but nobody told them the science. And the science was very, very simple. The vaccine was to protect against severe disease. It didn't train the mucosal immune system, so it couldn't prevent infection. So the mechanism for using it across the board in the whole population was scientifically flawed. I'm sorry to say that because a lot of people may be upset by that. I'm just saying it as it is. If you understand the disease, you know what you should do and what you shouldn't do. Now, the problem is, now that they have done this action and they covered that information, one, they had to absolutely completely stop the pandemic. If you're going to do that, you are not allowed to make a mistake. And two, they needed to make sure that nobody was harmed. And that's the problem. If somebody already had natural immunity and was therefore extremely low risk, forget even about their age and so on, and they then got an issue, that is a huge responsibility. And I suspect nobody wants to talk about it. So I appreciate Thomas Massie for bringing this to light. This is a really important piece of information. But it will come with a cost because there's going to be a question about why that cohort was targeted in the first place. So I hope you find this valuable. Just remember the principles. Interferon, delayed interferon response is what leads to severe COVID-19, and natural immunity tends to block that from occurring. It doesn't mean somebody can't get a mild infection, but they're unlikely to have severe COVID-19 in terms of that autoimmune response. So, thank you for listening. Remember to subscribe. You will see a little bell right here on the screen because oftentimes your subscribe button is hidden. Click on that and you'll be able to subscribe to the channel. Look forward to bringing you more information and look in the description below for the links to our courses. Have a great evening.